Holy smokes, guys. Just wait until you see this brand new app that literally shows you everything underneath the water. Yes, underneath the water. It's like radar and sonar on steroids, and it's all part of our Smart Fishing Spots app. This is the new app. We've been working on this thing forever, and it actually has everything you need all in one. So you can delete all your other fishing apps. You're literally going to have everything from the wind and the weather and the tides and the radar and the sonar and the satellite maps all into one app. And when you see this underwater version, you are going to be absolutely blown away. It is going to give you more fishing spots than you ever imagined. It's going to help you see exactly what's under the water wherever you might be. And it is going to give you next level advantage over the fish and your fishing buddies. The best news, it's completely for free. Just one more reason to join the Insider Club. If you're a current member, get ready. It is coming to you soon. And if you're not, what the heck are you waiting for? Join the Salt Strong Insider Club today. Hope to see you in the club and enjoy this episode.
It's fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back again talking about seagrass. We've talked about this before. We've talked about some water quality issues, and this whole seagrass thing keeps coming up, right? And I think this is going to be an ongoing debate, and just really not. I guess the debate's the wrong word, but it's going to be an ongoing topic. We spent a lot of time talking about the issues over on the east coast of Florida in the lagoon. And, now like people like my brother, who's only been in St. Pete, Tampa area for 6-7 years, have noticed a noticeable difference, like on decline in terms of seagrass. Places that used to be filled with seagrass and had tons of trout and a lot of marine life now don't have that much. And Tampa Bay is kind of considered one of like the rah-rah stories in the past. And even that seems to be on decline. There are some great things happening, but there's at least in my opinion, from what I can see, there's a whole lot more negative things that we need to talk about and have honest conversations about, and ultimately come up with some solutions. So I got Justin. What's up, Justin?
What up?
What do you mute yourself on a podcast? What are you doing?
Yeah, of courtessy. I don't know what all the strange sounds are going to happen in the background. No promises.
You have had your dog come on multiple times.
Yeah, let's not jinx that.
But Justin and I can't do this topic justice. So we got an expert, my friend and fellow Insider member, Buddy Harrison, had recommended Savanna Barry from UF, who literally studies grass all day long and has for a decade or more?
Yeah, I did my first study on seagrass in 2008. So, getting up there.
And so University of Florida?
Yes, I am an extension agent at the University of Florida with Florida Sea Grant, and I'm based in Cedar Key. But I got my start in the seagrass meadows of Virginia, which is where I'm from.
Too cool. And so now you're in lovely Florida, where it used to be all beautiful seagrass, and now you're fighting tooth and nail to bring it back. So I'm so glad you joined us, because we have a lot of questions, and I think there's a lot of confusion too. And so let's just kick it right off the bat is, why the heck is it even important, right? I think, a lot of people, especially tourists, they ooh and ah, it looks beautiful. They don't really understand the importance of it. And a lot of people think, it's just like real grass on our yard. It can grow back fast and we can just put some sod down and a little fertilizer and boo, bam, sham, it's back. But talk about, why do we need seagrass? Why is it important? And not just in the state of Florida, but everywhere.
Sure. Well, we can start with the obvious ones, which is that it basically forms habitat in what otherwise would be an unstructured bottom. And don't get me wrong, sand and mud flats have their role and they have things that live there. But there's much higher diversity of species that live in seagrass meadows. And a lot of those species we really care about in terms of fishing for them or scalloping or things like that. So the stat that you most often will hear thrown out there is that 85% of the fish and invertebrate species that we harvest or care about for our economy depend on seagrass for at least part of their life cycle. So that includes like gag grouper, sea trout, obviously, scallops, I already mentioned. So that habitat function is probably the one that has the most relevance to the most people in their day-to-day lives. But I think what people don't realize about seagrasses is that they're not just habitat. They're doing a lot of really cool things under the hood, if you will. So they're biogeochemical hotspots. They're doing a lot.
Whoa. We have a rule on here, and Justin usually breaks it. We cannot have any massive words like that. I'm now, I have to write it down, bio, whatever you said.
Okay. Well, basically carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, oxygen, all of these chemicals that have a big influence on water quality, climate, that kind of thing. Seagrasses are really active zones where oxygen is released through photosynthesis, carbon is captured, nitrogen is transformed into different forms that are either harmful or less harmful, depending on microbes and all of that. So it can get quite complex. And certain seagrasses are better at certain parts of this than others. But basically, they're doing a lot of things that influence other parts of the system. And also just their physical interaction with the water column. They can trap sediments with their roots, but their leaves also slow down the water enough that it causes particles to settle out. And it also reduces the amount of sediment that can be kicked up when the wind and waves, when we have storms pass through. So it helps keep water clearer overall. They're pretty. They provide a lot of other stuff as well, though, that it's a lot harder to see with your eye.
Yeah, in general, I associate beautiful areas like South Florida, for instance, and the Keys. I associate that pristine, clear water with seagrass, right? And on the flip side, I associate, some other areas. I'm not going to rip on anyone's certain state, but areas that are just more murky and just nasty water where you can't see down at all with no seagrass down there. And it's incredibly important. And Justin, you already like Savanna, I could tell just from the big word. What do you call them? The $5 word she's throwing out?
I think she said biogeochemical hotspot, right?
That's right.
Yes. He's pumped. He's like, I'm going to use that one on the next podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm stealing that.
Well, what you said about the water clarity, it's actually kind of like a chicken and egg thing. So seagrasses need that light to reach the bottom in order to survive. But like the fact that they're surviving there also helps keep conditions good for light to reach the bottom. So they kind of reinforce the conditions that they need to survive. So, but we can definitely push them out of that state.
And so if you unravel that, right, and all of a sudden kill the seagrass, and now the water gets jerkier, you've got sediment getting stirred up, and there's no more really opportunity for good photosynthesis, that's tough or maybe even impossible for it to grow back. Like if you planted seagrass in horrible, murky water, it's probably going to die.
Yeah, I mean, really, if the reason seagrasses are lost from an area is because of light penetration being prevented because of either sediment or algae in the water column, if you try to plant them back without first addressing that water quality issue, they're not going to survive. So, and it's really hard to claw back. So they kind of get stuck in this vicious cycle of, sediment resuspension and murky water. And it's kind of, I don't want to throw out another big term there, but some people refer to this as alternative stable states.
Okay. I can handle that. I can handle that. And I'm glad you said it slow because I got a good process. All right. So why, I think I know the answer, but why are we seeing all the seagrass die? I've seen prop scars, and we're going to talk about that because we have a lot of our listeners own boats. And that is a big issue. And I think a lot of it's just dismiss it. I saw on the one article you sent over prior that a prop scar can take a few years at best case to 60 to never, meaning 60 plus years just to recover back to where it was from one prop scar. That's pretty scary. But what are the other causes? Is it the pollution? Is it I'm even the way here? It took me 25 minutes to get to my office. Normally it's 12. There's traffic. Everyone's coming down to Florida. Is it all these people? And what the heck's happening with seagrass?
Yeah, well,
I want to blame someone, and I'm looking for a good answer.
Well, you can blame humans, certainly. So, I mean, we'll get to the physical damage and the prop scar part, but globally and in Florida, the number one reason for seagrass loss is water quality decline. And when I say water quality, I mostly mean water clarity and light not getting to the bottom. And a lot of that is algal blooms, and that is fueled by nutrients and other pollutants coming into the coastal estuaries. And a lot of the way that fresh water that carries those pollutants is delivered into our estuaries can really matter. So when we have a lot of pavement and also a lot of fertilized surfaces, whether that be farms or lawns or golf courses or whatever, it means we have a lot more nutrients concentrated in that water. And the pavement means that water is reaching the coast much faster than it would have, and without passing through like soils and other vegetated systems that it normally would have, where some of those pollutants would be filtered out. So we kind of have the double whammy of like, we're putting more stuff in the water and we're sending the water downstream faster than we should be. And that means there's a lot of extra nutrients in these systems. And algae grow faster than seagrasses when presented with extra nutrients. So it shifts that competitive dominance towards algae and away from seagrasses.
Justin, I know you're dying to ask a question.
I have like two or three, but I have to like stage them because they're in the arc of our conversation. So, we kind of talked before we got on the call and talked about how when things are good with seagrass, things are really good. If there's seagrass that's growing and flourishing, if there's a little bit of a decline naturally, but water quality and water clarity are within that sweet spot that produce growth for seagrass, it's great. But when it's bad, it's really bad, because if seagrass dies and upturns and all that sediment gets suspended, it plays into that water quality aspect that blocks sunlight, that excessive nutrient that's been buried beneath the soil or the sediment, and the root structure is now going to feed an algae source, green filamentous algae, brown algae, something to block more light that's going to help prevent the seagrass from growing again. So it's kind of crazy that it's like this, it's the scale, right? It has to be within that sweet spot and maintain within that sweet spot to make sure things don't go crazy out of control, and hope that things trend on a positive manner. If it's sustained and managed properly, then it will continue on the up and up. I think one thing that I thought was interesting is so water quality and water clarity being two totally different things. Water quality being your pH, alkalinity, hardness, temperature, all of those aspects, and water clarity simply being how far down can light penetrate through the water to help with seagrass growth. And I remember in years past when we mentioned the lagoon, Mosquito Lagoon, Indian River Lagoon a lot in previous podcasts. And we'll not go too far into that, but part of what people brought up was saying that the algae or the nutrients is what was killing seagrass or killing fish. And in actuality, it was partially dissolved oxygen content and, the lack of, clear water helping the seagrass to be able to grow that was remaining. So it kind of, just hearing you talk about this, it's fascinating to think of seagrass independently, not think of seagrass as a means to help support the things that we want. That's obviously the bigger goal. But if people better understand seagrass as is for what it is individually, they'll have a different respect and appreciation for how it ties into working with fish and working with everything else. But I think people need to better understand that whole process of the life cycle of seagrass, what they need and what they absolutely can't stand, and how we're kind of playing into that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we call seagrasses a foundation species because they do set that foundation for what type of system you're going to have. I mean, you and your listeners well know you can catch a lot of fish in murky water. I mean, there are types of fish that can survive in those types of systems. It's just a different type of food chain than the sort of, benthic, clear water type of food chain that we're talking about with seagrasses. So they do set that foundation, certainly. And they actually are pretty resilient. They live in this estuarine nearshore environment. They're adapted to deal with things like hurricanes and pulsed rain events, and they can kind of hang on and deal with periods of low light that are driven by those natural factors. I think just our human influences layered on top of that have really put a lot of seagrasses between a rock and a hard place. in terms of exhausting their resilience capacity.
Look, I want to talk about the Tampa deal. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but I've heard the stories, and that obviously, I assume it was similar, or was it? Were they dealing with the exact same type of issues? Meaning, was it waste? I don't know the whole story with Tampa, but it was a great turnaround story when it seems like everyone got together, the municipalities in the state, and people were just kind of pissed off because, hey, it used to be a beautiful bay, and now it looks, like doo-doo brown color. It's not good. What was the story there, and what can we learn from that in terms of kind of rebuilding?
Yeah, I think the restoration of seagrasses in Tampa Bay, despite recent setbacks, is still one of the best success stories we have about how this can be done. And you're right that it was a huge collaboration between scientists and government and local citizens and the water management folks that basically invested in wastewater treatment and reducing nitrogen. So kind of the root issue was nitrogen. They identified that through scientific studies that was basically the nutrient of most concern. We need to manage both nitrogen and phosphorus, but that was what they mostly targeted for reduction. And they did a lot of studies to figure out kind of how much the load would need to be reduced in order to reach target light levels. And they set a very specific goal, which I think is another great thing that they did right in restoration. Articulating a specific goal is really key in making sure everybody is on the same page with that. And there were some politically unpopular decisions that had to be made, some really costly investments in some of this non-sexy infrastructure on things to basically treat wastewater and slow down stormwater and pass ordinances against applying fertilizer in certain seasons and actually enforcing those. And so I don't know off the top of my head the exact numbers, but basically they were able to reach their goal by improving water quality over decades. They stuck to it over a really long period of time. They reached their goal despite a huge increase in the population of the Tampa Bay watershed during that same period. So they actually were able to bring nutrients down, bring the seagrass up, even though population was exploding in the area. So it is possible to do. It takes a lot of people cooperating and people with the end goal in mind. And as we're seeing now, the work is kind of never finished because there will always be something else to add insult to injury to some of our coastal systems, kind of these legacy poor decisions that we're still recovering from.
Why isn't it as easy today of just saying, all right, it's nitrogen. We identified the issue. That's I think what everyone wants, right? Here's the problem. It's nitrogen. It's at level, whatever, ABC, and we need to get it to AB. And here's what we have to do. Because I the whole fertilizer thing, it's interesting. I moved to Georgia for a while and bought my first house up there and had a beautiful yard until the wintertime came. Georgia, they don't have the St. Augustine grass like we have. And I'm freaking out. It's my yard looks like it's brown. It's dead. And then I realized, it's just happening to everyone up here. It's just what you do. And then I forgot about it. But otherwise, I was like, all right, I got to get fertilizer. I got to fix this problem. But I think where I'm going with this is I feel like so many people in Florida only spend all this crazy amounts of money and time and people to get their yards so beautiful. It's because they want to keep up with the Joneses next door, right? It's like, well, man, Bob and Mary, they have a beautiful yard. I got to keep up with that and do the same thing. I see it in my own neighborhood. And so I feel like at some point that kind of has to happen. We did a podcast recently with just my brother and I, was something that he saw, and he lives on St. Pete on one of those canals that dumps right into the bay. And the guy's sitting there pressure washing with hardcore chemicals and told him what it was. And these chemicals are bubbling up and it's going right there into the little storm drain. And Luke's like, hey, do you know where that goes? And the guy's like, I assume it goes to some water treatment. He's like, no, dude, it goes right in the canal. It literally goes right underneath my house into the canal, and took a little video of it. And that same guy went around, it was his job, and he's literally putting hardcore chemicals on these driveways because it said it cuts the time in half from 4 hours to 1 versus doing old school pressure washing with just water. He literally puts the chemicals over it, waits an hour, and then just washes it off real quick and just saved himself 3 hours. And yet all those chemicals, and that's just one canal out of many. And Luke says he watched him go to house and say, hey, he literally did what I just said. Hey, I just did your neighbor's house. Look how good their driveway looks. Do you want me to do yours? They're like, sure. And he literally knocked out like half the street. And that's just one example of like a million. I mean, it's crazy how much stuff that we're crap and horrible things that we're putting into our waterways. And in many cases, like this guy, he literally did not know that it was going in there. We just assume that, yeah, it's going to some treatment plant and they're getting all this stuff cleared and they're reusing it. And in many cases, that's not true.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you kind of hit on it that a lot of homeowners probably don't know what's being applied to their lawn or their, if someone comes to wash their car, their driveway, or their siding or whatever it is, because a lot of these contracts are managed through homeowners associations and landscaping companies and things like that. And there's a really great program, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, that can help address this, at least in terms of the home landscape. But yeah, the driveway pressure washing, that's actually a new one. I haven't heard about that one. But a general awareness of where storm drains go and just our water system in general, I think is overall lacking. And I don't think a lot of the pollution that happens is intentional. I think people want to believe that these systems are, there's someone's watching out for what water goes where. And that's, it would be impossible to do that in the case of a lot of stormwater systems.
So I also heard that, there's some great companies out there that are replanting grass. I know you're part of it. You guys do a lot of restoration, but I heard a lot of this stuff is just dying. And I assume it just goes back because it's like putting lipstick on a pig. Like you can't put brand new grass and hope it's going to thrive in water that's horrible in some cases. I mean, is that happening? I don't want to like poo-poo on the idea of, hey, we shouldn't donate to places that are doing grass restoration, but it's almost like we need to figure out the water problem, right? The water quality problem first before we start just planting a ton of grass.
Yeah. And
is that a true fact?
Every site is going to be a little bit different. So like in the case of maybe prop scars or smaller scale, like seagrass that was lost for a cause that has now been removed, planting seagrass can be a justifiable approach there to help speed up its recruitment back into that area. But if we have water quality as the main reason why seagrass isn't surviving and that water quality issue has not been addressed, then it is probably a waste of time to start with planting. There are examples of seagrass restorations that have been successful over the large scale with planting, but in those cases, those are bays where the seagrass was lost decades ago because of a disease and the water quality was still good. It just, no seagrass seeds could really like float into that area because of flow patterns. And so they brought back in the seagrass material and through seeds and planting, and it expanded on its own. So it's not that it never works. It's just that you really need an understanding of the system and the original reason for the loss. And if current conditions are viable for seagrass, so taking light measurements over seasons, over multiple times at that site to figure out if it's within the tolerance for that species would definitely be something you would want to do, especially if you've already tried it once and it hasn't panned out. So yeah.
How do you plant them? It's not like laying down big things of sod. Is it seed by seed?
Well, it depends on the species. So the one I was referring to was actually not a species that we have in Florida that was spread by seed. So here in Florida, mostly the way it's done is either through little plugs that are grown up in a nursery, like a flow-through system, or by collecting like intact rhizomes with seagrass individuals on it that are then like woven into these coconut mats that can then be pinned down. So those are kind of two of the more common approaches. And it's mostly done with shoal grass, which is the fastest growing of the three kind of main species we think of when we think of seagrass. But it's kind of an interesting point. It made me think back to, like, it's not like spreading lawn seed or anything. And seagrasses actually are more closely related to lilies than they are to our lawn grass. So, genetically, they're really more like a flower than they are like a grass or a weed. So they don't grow as quickly as many people probably might think.
That also means you probably just don't throw seeds out and hope and pray they work. You got to like get it in the dirt like you do a flower.
Yeah. And it's interesting. This is actually a really active topic of research is how much natural seagrasses even rely on their own seeds. And it varies a lot by species and location. But seagrasses, often the way they carpet an area is by expanding through just sending out shoots under, like runners under the sediment. So, like I said, it varies a lot, but it's thought that some seagrass meadows really don't even themselves rely much on seed spreading in their natural state.
So I want to talk about the process of what is put down as the base or foundation to help with seagrass transports, like plugging seagrass. But my first question is, if you take a prop scar, for example, and that prop scar is running right through a natural seagrass bed in parameters that are otherwise healthy and normal, why is it so difficult for the seagrass to grow along that prop scar bed if seagrass's tendencies are to run underground and grow shoots and rhizomes, like you said? In theory, all the recipe for success is right there by the surrounding seagrass. Why is that seagrass area that was chopped up and the roots are gone, why does that take so long for the roots to grow over that barren area?
So that's a great question. And the reason comes down to the fact that seagrass rhizomes can grow sideways and they can grow up, but they can't grow down into a trench. And so if we have like a prop dredge that's deep enough to remove the roots and also like scour away the sand or sediment, then the roots are not going to be able to like grow down into that cavern. So a lot of times we bring sediment like in these big, basically long gym socks and just lay it along, and the roots will knit back in. So they basically need like a level surface to grow into.
That makes perfect sense. There's that little divot, and that's why, Joe, when we go fish, we sometimes will find fish navigating along those prop scars because it is a depth contour edge. It's not the same level as everything else. I didn't know that. That's cool.
So
and that's actually
level, huh?
And that's one of the ecosystem effects of prop scars is that they increase the success of predators in that habitat mosaic, because predators like to troll along those edges and they can have, they can pick off their prey there. So that's often, I hear that from fishermen quite often, that they like to target prop scars because they find fish there.
Like I don't know the right word for it, but I mean, it's kind of like an accidental good thing. It's not a good thing, but for fishermen in that moment, they're like, hey, what do you know?
Depends on your perspective, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So as I was asking, the process of planting seagrass, I remember when we watched that video you sent us and the blog that we were reading, there's like this base, or you said coconut mats, and I think inside of them is some sort of organic matter or detritus or sediment. I'm not sure what's in it, that helps support the growth of seagrasses and helps maintain the sediment within the area so that it can grow well. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so they're called sediment tubes, and it's like literally just a long cotton tube filled with sand that matches the local sediment type. And sometimes they're little grass plugs that are planted into those, but sometimes the method is to just literally lay those in the scar to just bring it back up to like level grade with the surrounding area. And like there's a similar approach with blowouts, which is not the scar, but it's like if someone runs aground on seagrass and they try to power off and they just create this big deep hole. A lot of times what they do is they bring in like loads of pea gravel and they fill that up with gravel, and then they put like a top coating of those sediment tubes on top of that, because again, that's not going to heal naturally pretty much ever. So it requires intervention by a human force, but it's really expensive and extremely tedious, as you can imagine, to do this. So it's obviously better to just avoid creating those in the first place. And there can be some pretty stiff penalties, especially in the Keys, for creating a blowout and prop scars.
It's good. A good thing. And yeah, I won't go there, but we've even seen, some guides that have just done some pretty irresponsible things, just because it's like, it's my job and I want to get through quick and it's shallow. And I'm just like, what in the world? It drives me absolutely nuts. Because we literally saw a guide just create, when that's going to be a future podcast, by the way, about guide etiquette. And yeah, we saw this guy fly right by us in a no wake zone, by the way. Like, I mean, signs right there in front of us, and he just flies by because that was the only way to get to the area. and we went over with our trolling motor and our prop up. And I mean, we literally saw the prop scar he made. I'm like, that's ridiculous. And these are people who should kind of want there to be fewer prop scars, right? Because they're relying on making a living. Really, really frustrating. So seagrass is resilient. It takes quite some time to basically die off in most cases. But that also means it's kind of slow to grow. So what are we talking about here? If let's just say we have snap your fingers, if things are getting better, water clarity is getting better, we start fixing. How is this a 10-year, like 20-year, 2-year? How long does it take to really kind of rebuild if we kind of fix the water quality problems, which we'll talk about in a second?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of a hard question to answer because it's going to vary on a lot of things. But I could say it's probably for a system that's experienced prolonged seagrass loss, it's going to be many years, probably at least a decade, if not more. I mean, for the Tampa Bay example, they started this work back in the 70s and they finally accomplished their goal. I think it was 2017 or 2018. They kind of hit their target. So that's a long time to be committed to a project, but you have to understand that it's going to work. There's something called legacy nutrients in a system, especially one that doesn't get flushed out a lot, like the Indian River Lagoon. And that's basically like all the muck and stuff that's accumulated on the bottom. And it takes a long time for microbes and other forces in the system to transform those legacy nutrients or, sort of bind them up into the places they used to be bound in. So understanding how much of that legacy load you have in the system is going to be an important factor. And there are even efforts to remove some of those muck layers and things like that, which is of course extremely costly. And then you have the whole problem of where do you put it once you take it out and everything like that. So it is a long haul proposition, but there are a lot of really bright spots. I mean, Sarasota Bay, there's some recent papers that have come out about how we've seen seagrasses going in the right direction in many of our coastal systems. And like I said, there have been some recent setbacks based on, known nutrient inputs that hopefully are one-time events or have been identified in the case of Sarasota Bay. And the estuary programs and other folks are keeping good watch on this. So we have pretty robust monitoring. We have really good mapping of a lot of our seagrass in Florida. So I think that there is hope, but it again, it's going to take political will and investment and, kind of a long-term commitment. You can't just snap your fingers and expect these problems that took decades to build up are going to be resolved quickly. But, it is true that we have the information and the techniques to do what needs to be done. It's a slow machine, updating stormwater, retrofitting wastewater treatment, creating more treatment wetlands, trying to find ways to reverse the damage caused by all this pavement. All those things take time, and we have a lot of turnover of decision makers throughout that time. So I think if the more people that understand that we just need to stay the course on water quality and septic to sewer and all these things, it's not the sexy answer, but it's really, just improving our watersheds are going to improve our seagrasses.
So if someone gave you $1 billion, it should be enough to at least get a start with a B. And this is only to help seagrass, basically starting with water quality issues. Where do you begin? What is like the first big domino you want to knock down? This doesn't mean this is like the number one like issue, but where do you start with that? If someone said, "All right, here's a grant for $1 billion, you're in charge. What are you going to do?"
I would do projects to slow down the speed with which rainwater reaches the coast. So basically, trying to reverse the effects of pavement and those impervious surfaces, as we call them. And then that comes down to like really expensive projects with stormwater, low impact design. And I think I would also hire a lot of people to work with developers and other people that make decisions in Florida about what kind of landscape is going to be here, what type of irrigation are we going to use, that kind of thing. So the people that are making the decisions and making the money, it's often really hard for people like me to reach folks like that. We have people at UF that work on that, but it's a really big task and development happens at a really quick pace. And I think creating the demand for people that want a low impact landscape, we have the tools. We just need the people in charge that make the decisions to actually make that decision. And then for people to start demanding it.
So to confirm, you bring on a team of people who know how to have the conversations with those that make the decisions from a developmental aspect to take a course of action that fits their bill and their agenda of what they need to do, but also is less harmful to the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The stormwater managers, the developers, the land use planners, there are a lot of people that are getting more and more on board with this kind of thing. But I think it could definitely happen faster. And anything that slows down or, filters out the delivery of nutrients to our estuaries is going to ultimately benefit seagrasses.
Yeah, remember, Justin, we had the doctor on from Orca. And we asked her kind of a similar question, and she talked about what they did and actually, took samples, didn't just say, hey, I think it's better. And what is it called when you take like your last 3 feet of your, let's just say St. Augustine grass to an actual canal, like to a seawall? And
like a filtering system where the rainwater would storm off into like an organic matter, kind of like what seagrass do for the environment for filtering things, what dunes do for protecting hurricanes, same kind of process. She built a watershed on her property to filter a lot of that out. So implementing, that was one thing I thought of in the areas that we have natural stormwater that drains into the lagoon systems, implementing a natural means of filtration at those locations.
Mm-hmm.
That's one small effort.
But they took water samples, remember, before and after. It was like night. It wasn't just like a slight, it was like literally like a whole different area. Like it was nuts. I was like, wow. And it still looked good. You can envision it like little rocks and some nice little, Florida palms or whatever they put in there. It looks nice. I've seen them before. You can
like 1 to 2 minutes, you could show people in a video, like, this is what it was before, plus you add this thing, and this is what it is after in a short period of time. People would open their eyes and say, oh, wow, that's not that bad to do. If I can make that kind of impact, I would support that sort of initiative. I think people see the impact of what things like that can do is the goal, right?
Yeah, those fringing buffers are so important. And there's like some really sad stories I've seen presented of people that worked with this community to plant this fringing buffer, and it was looking great and it had grown tall. And then the landscaping company mowed it down because there wasn't that communication between that. So again, like this conversation between the people that live there and the people that manage the landscape and all of that. But I think they resolved that situation eventually. But yeah, like getting people to realize these aren't weeds, like these are preserving, these are doing something really important for our water bodies. Like, do you want a green lake, or do you just want some tall grass right next to the lake, and the lake will be less green. So
so good. What about these bird stakes too? That was kind of interesting. I remember seeing them the first time and I was like, who put all these PVC pipes in this area? And I understand why. You basically get birds on there and they're pooping and basically fertilizing an area. Talk about that, because I'm sure some people have probably seen it before too. Like, who in the world put all these white stakes out here?
Yeah, so we've kind of been talking about like fertilizer as a bad thing in general when it comes to seagrasses. But it is true that some areas, especially in the Keys, seagrasses don't get enough phosphorus. So again, I talked about nitrogen being the main culprit. A lot of times nitrogen is, the one that causes these blooms. But down in the Keys, there's a lot of phosphorus limitation of the seagrasses. So especially when they're trying to restore these blowholes or the prop scars, they try to give them a little boost of phosphorus through that bird poop. And I guess they figure the birds are going to poop in the water anyway. They might as well poop right on this little area. And so it's actually not an addition of any new phosphorus to the system. It's just getting it right where it needs to go in terms of the seagrass. So that's really only a justifiable approach when the area is phosphorus limited. And but yeah, it is kind of a cool way to repurpose, if you will, that bird guano into a productive situation.
I could see it being a good prank, Justin. Is that I remember the one time in high school we forked this girl's yard because she had toilet papered my house, and we bought like old school Sam's Club, like the biggest thing of forks ever, and forked. That means like one at a time. That means they got to pick them up one at a time because you can't just run it over. And imagine doing that and just having birds pooping all over the yard while they're gone out of town for a week. This could be good.
Yeah, we had good intention when we did that, right?
Very good. That's the dumb stuff you do in high school.
Those stake locations you talk about, phosphorus limited, I would imagine it's current limited as well, right? Because it would obviously need to be within an area that it's not going to sweep away, or it's like a cove or an eddy or something that area doesn't get the same type of tidal flow, right?
Well, I mean, it's very much a local effect, right? It's only really going to affect right around that stake. And I'm sure there's going to be periods of time where the water's flowing so much that it is going to sort of be transported away. But like if you've ever been, or I'm sure you fished around like a bird rookery island, and you can definitely smell it. But if you ever look down into the seagrasses, if there are any around that island, often you'll see they're extremely fuzzy. Right next to the bird rookery, they have these this algae that grows on the surface, and that algae is fertilized by the bird poop. But as you sort of move away from that bird island, you'll see the grass get less fuzzy. And so that kind of like, it's overall the bird kind of input is very localized, but it does have a fertilizing effect.
Bird poop. All right. So how can we help? Like as anglers, regardless of where we live, I think we'd all prefer to have seagrass in our areas. How can we help? The prop scarf thing is an obvious one. Is there certain committees we should go join? The places we should donate to? Like how can people get more involved if they're fired up about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, anywhere that you have influence, like if you do sit on your HOA board, or if you can talk to whoever mows your lawn or whatever, you can definitely make changes in either in your neighborhood or in your own backyard to use more native plants, reduce irrigation, reduce fertilizer, adopt Florida-friendly landscaping, that kind of thing. Of course, the prop scarring is like super obvious one, like just take an extra few minutes if it's shallow, whatever. Use that time to just enjoy nature instead of trying to blast back to the boat ramp, check your tides, that kind of thing, all the obvious stuff. So the more we can prevent that, the better. But, supporting and talking to your friends about what these water quality improvements take. I know that sometimes there can be a lot of opposition when communities try to get rid of septic tanks and go over to sewer systems. Just because that is definitely a personal, that does add to your bill. But a lot of times there's a lot of assistance for that. So these things can be a little bit unpopular, but if we understand how they're connected to the end state that we all want to get to, it's actually a small price to pay. And when you look at sort of the alternative of these major cleanups, or basically losing an important part of the economy because we have this big algal bloom, and then all of a sudden people are canceling their Airbnbs because they see it on the news and that kind of thing. So just recognizing these like investments are a long-term thing, and it's going to get us there eventually. And so trying not to fight back against truly effective water quality improvements and, stormwater things and that kind of stuff. So I think everyone will probably listen to this and know where they can have the most impact. And the more people that care, I think the better off we'll be. Love it.
Justin, any more big words you want to throw out there? Any big questions?
No, she's got me beat with the 3-parter. Thermal, man, I can't remember it now. What was it?
Biogeochemical hotspots.
Oh,
sounds so cool. Cool. Well, we're in case anyone has questions, do you have an easy way to contact you? Obviously, we'll have comments below if you're watching this on the YouTube or in the podcast area or on our blog down below. Usually, there's a place to put a comment, unless you're on Stitcher. I don't know why they don't allow any kind of feedback and reviews and stuff. So weird. But everywhere else you can. But if anyone wants to contact you, you on the Twitter, the Instagram, or anything special like that?
Yeah, so you can find me on the Nature Coast Biological Station's website or through Florida Sea Grant. And then also we have a network of people like me all around the state. So I'm based in the Cedar Key area, but Florida Sea Grant and IFAS Extension, they have people that work on marine issues all around the state. So through the Florida Sea Grant website, you can find out the closest one to you, but you can also find my information there. And I am on Twitter and Instagram through the Nature Coast Biological Station.
Very cool. Well, Savanna, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. This was helpful, definitely educational, answered some questions. And I hopefully just gets people kind of thinking too, right? And a lot of this is, awareness. Unfortunately, it's not like you said, you can't just snap your fingers and have it done. A lot of it's just, having discussions and getting more and more people talking about it and getting more people pissed off when they see prop scars. They see areas that used to look beautiful, right? In terms of just clear water and a lot of grass, and now don't. And that should kind of tick all of us off, because at the end of the day, it's on us as people. It's not just global warming. It's usually us causing these problems. This seagrass is quite resilient in its natural form, and we're the unnatural part of it. So I really do appreciate it. And if we can do anything to help you out, let me know.
Thank you so much for caring about seagrass.
Oh, yeah. Whoop, whoop. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. And leave some comments down below if you have them. And if there's any future episodes about seagrass or conservation, restoration, anything, let us know. Or even if we can do one on really big words. Maybe we'll have one where we just talk about big words that we have to look up. So appreciate you guys. Peace. We out. Woo-hoo.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was pain.